What if I told you that a single decision made in Brussels, meant to protect Europe's auto industry, may have ended up boosting not only China's grip on global trade, but also Russia's struggling sanction-hit economy? In mid-2024, the European Union thought it was making a power move. By slapping steep tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles, the goal was simple: shield European car makers from being drowned out by China's wave of cheaper, more advanced EVs. On paper, it was a smart strategy. European automakers were falling behind, and Chinese brands like BYD and Geely were eating into the market at lightning speed. But instead of slowing China down, this move set off a chain reaction nobody saw coming. China struck back, not on cars but on Europe's softest economic underbelly, its pork exports. And while Europe and China traded blows, a third player suddenly appeared in the shadows: Russia. Almost overnight, Russian exporters began signing deals to replace Europe as China's meat supplier. What started as a tariff battle over electric cars spiraled into a global trade reshuffle, reshaping alliances and raising a chilling question. Did the EU just hand its geopolitical rival, Russia, a massive gift, all while trying to de-risk from China? Let's rewind and unpack how we got here. To understand why the EU went to war with Chinese EVs, you need to see the storm brewing in Europe's auto industry. For decades, brands like Volkswagen, Renault, and Peugeot dominated the continent. Their cars weren't just vehicles. They were symbols of European pride, engineering, and industry. But then came the electric revolution. And here, Europe fell behind. China didn't just join the EV race, it sprinted past everyone. By 2023, Chinese automakers had become the world's leaders in new energy vehicles. They weren't playing catch-up. They were leapfrogging entire generations of car tech. The key? Batteries. Chinese companies cracked the formula for cheaper, longer-lasting, and smarter battery systems. That gave them a weapon Europe couldn't match price. The average Chinese EV sold in Europe cost about 20% less than a locally made one, and consumers noticed. By late 2023, Chinese EVs had already captured 12% of the EU market, with predictions they'd surpass 18% by 2025. This wasn't just competition. For European automakers already struggling with high costs and sluggish innovation, it was existential. Lose the EV race, and Europe risked losing its place as an industrial powerhouse altogether. So Brussels turned to protection. And that's where things took a dangerous turn. In mid-2024, after months of fierce internal debate, the European Commission made its move. It imposed tariffs of 17.4% to 38.1% on Chinese EVs. BYD was slapped with 17.4%. Geely faced 20%. SAIC, one of the most aggressive exporters, got hit with the maximum 38.1%. The justification? Europe accused Chinese automakers of flooding the market with cars artificially cheapened by state subsidies, making fair competition impossible. But inside the EU, cracks were already showing. France championed the tariffs, arguing they were the only way to save Europe's car industry and protect jobs. But Germany? Terrified. Here's why. German automakers like Volkswagen and BMW didn't just sell cars in Europe. They relied heavily on the Chinese market. Any retaliation from Beijing could hit them like a hammer. Denmark, Italy, and Hungary also voiced doubts. Still, Brussels pushed forward. With only 4 countries openly opposing, the tariffs passed. Europe had drawn its line in the sand. But in trying to stand tall, the EU may have exposed its weakest point. If Brussels expected Beijing to back off, it was dead wrong. In June 2024, Beijing quietly announced an anti-dumping investigation, not on cars, but on pork imports from the EU. On the surface, it looked routine, just bureaucratic language. But beneath it was a clear message. You hit our industries, we'll hit yours where it hurts most. And this wasn't random. Pork is the most consumed meat in China, over 55 million tons per year, nearly half the global total. It's central to Chinese diets, traditions, and culture. Europe supplied a huge share of it. Countries like Spain, Germany, Denmark, and France had built billion-dollar export businesses selling pork to China. In some cases, China was their single largest customer. So when Beijing turned its gaze on European pork, it wasn't just threatening one sector, it was threatening to kneecap entire rural economies. And it worked. Take Spain. In 2023, Spain exported around 560,000 tons of pork to China, worth hundreds of millions of dollars. But once the anti-dumping investigation began, that entire pipeline was in jeopardy. Analysts warned Spain alone could lose $400 million if China imposed tariffs. Across the EU, the damage could slash pork exports by 30 to 40%. The ripple effect was brutal. Chinese prices would jump by 20%. European producers would face oversupply crises. Farmers, transporters, and processors across rural Europe would be thrown into chaos. The irony? In trying to save its car industry, Europe was now risking its farming backbone. And farmers knew exactly who to blame: Brussels. But as Europe scrambled to deal with the fallout, Russia was already moving in. For years, Russia's economy had been battered by sanctions from the West. Cut off from major European and American markets, Moscow desperately needed new trade partners. And where better to turn than China? So when Europe's pork pipeline to China started collapsing, Russia saw its opening. By August 2024, just weeks after Beijing's move, Chinese companies began signing new pork contracts. Not with Spain or Germany, but with Russia. Within months, 50 to 60,000 tons of Russian pork had already been shipped. Small compared to Europe's former share, but the direction was crystal clear. Russia's pork industry openly announced its ambitions: capture 10% of China's pork import market within 3 to 4 years. For Moscow, this was more than business. It was survival. For Beijing, it was smart geopolitics: reduce reliance on Europe, deepen ties with Russia, and gain leverage in any future standoff with the EU. And all of this was happening because of Europe's tariffs. But China wasn't done. In August 2024, just one day after Brussels doubled down on its EV tariffs, Beijing launched a second blow: an anti-subsidy investigation into European Union dairy imports. Now, it wasn't just pork at risk. It was cheese, milk powder, butter, industries that are absolutely critical to countries like France, Denmark, and the Netherlands. The message from Beijing was unmistakable, right? We won't escalate blindly, but we'll hit your exports where they hurt most. Meanwhile, inside the EU, political fractures widened. Germany, Denmark, Italy, and Hungary openly opposed the tariffs, warning they were destroying Europe's farmers and exporters. But under EU rules, reversing them required at least 15 member states to oppose. Nowhere near enough. Europe was trapped. Retreat and look weak, or push forward and keep bleeding. And here's the brutal truth: the tariffs didn't even save Europe's car industry. Chinese EVs didn't vanish. They just became slightly more expensive. Still competitive, still popular. Backed by subsidies, Chinese companies could afford to take the hit. European automakers, not so much. Instead of closing the gap, the tariffs widened it. European companies were still struggling, still slow to innovate, still facing higher costs. Meanwhile, Europe's agriculture sector was crumbling under Chinese retaliation. Farmers were losing billions, Russia was gaining billions, and China was strengthening its supply chains outside the EU. The EU had tried to de-risk from China. Instead, it ended up isolating itself and empowering its rivals. Step back, and the picture is clear. The EU set out to weaken China's dominance in EVs. Instead, it triggered a broader trade conflict that failed to slow down Chinese automakers, devastated Europe's pork and dairy industries, and gave Russia a lucrative lifeline to rebuild its economy. China didn't panic. It played smart. It targeted Europe's pressure points, avoided unnecessary escalation, and walked away stronger. Russia didn't even have to fight. It just watched, waited, and collected the rewards. And Europe? It got stuck between politics, protectionism, and unintended consequences. So here's the real question. In this global chess match, did the EU make its move too hastily? And by trying to punish China, did it actually weaken itself and hand Russia exactly what it needed to climb back into the game? That's the story. And as new investigations, tariffs, and trade battles continue to unfold, one thing is certain: this fight is far from over. So what do you think? Did Brussels miscalculate? Or is this just the painful cost of defending Europe's industries? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you want more deep dives into how global trade wars are reshaping the world, make sure you're subscribed. The next story might just change the way you see the future of the global economy.